Googled Agile and UX, even 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago certainly, it was nothing but stories of failure and heartbreak and bad relationships, you know. And that's kind of, you know, because we're coming out of many, many years in design of essentially making documentation. I certainly spent the first 10 years of my career making documents. And I didn't want to continue doing that for the rest of my career. That's not what I signed up to do. I signed up to design products. And, you know, coincidentally, Agile started becoming a bit more popular. And so we had to figure out how to make Agile and UX work together. Now, the opportunity for me was that right around that time, I started working at a company called The Ladders in New York. The Ladders is a job board in New York that at the time helped people who made $100,000 or more connect with employers that were looking to hire them. And I had the opportunity to build a design team just as the engineering organization of The Ladders was becoming more, was transitioning into Agile. So we figured there had to be a way to make all of this work together. And over time, I was very lucky at that time because I was given essentially a lab to work in. I had a UX team, and I actually had a cross-functional product team that I could work with to figure out how to make these ideas work together. And we tried a lot of things and we failed a lot of different ways. Kind of our first attempt was to take the waterfall process that we've been practicing for so long and just condense it into 2-week sprints. And that failed miserably. And then we tried to build design reviews into the sprint process, and that failed miserably. And over time, we kept practicing and trying different processes and different approaches, and eventually we figured it out. And that's really where a lot of the content for that Smashing Magazine article came from, was from working within the context of these teams and figuring out how to make Agile and user experience and design work well together. And there were two big epiphanies, two big learnings that came from that work. The first was that the way we did design had to change. We simply couldn't continue to work in that same waterfall way. Look, the nice thing about a waterfall process is that there is a discrete period of time dedicated to design. Now that may not be long enough, you can complain about that, or it may not be, you know, it may not provide all of the things that you're looking for, but at the very least, there was a design phase. And the realization that we made in working through Agile and UX coming together was that that view of design had to change. We simply couldn't disappear in a corner behind a giant monitor for a month and push all the pixels into the right spot, and then present that to the organization as the solution to the business problem. There had to be a new way of working together. And that involved a greater sense of collaboration, a greater sense of transparency, and most importantly, an increase in the inclusion of who were traditionally non-designers into the design process. So how do you bring engineering into the process sooner? How do you bring product management into the process sooner? How do you bring the customer into the process sooner? How do you bring the business into the process sooner? And this was very uncomfortable for us as designers because we had to start showing work that was unfinished. We had to take feedback on work that didn't feel complete. And it was a very big transition for the team, but this was the only way to make the process move faster in an agile world where people are expecting to ship something, maybe not something meaningful, but ship something at the end of a 2-week sprint. Now, the other interesting thing that we learned over time was that the whole product development process had to change. It wasn't just design that had to change, but the way we actually made the sausage, that's what my slide is about, right? The way that we made the sausage as a company had to change. In the past, there was this top-down, feature-driven approach to the way that we planned our work and executed our work. somebody would determine what features we had to build, somebody would scope and spec them out, we would design them, and then we would build them. But in reality, if design is going to be more collaborative, then product development has to be more collaborative. And a top-down approach doesn't work in a collaborative structure. And so this began to redefine the way that product managers were working with us, the way that project managers were working with us, clients, engineers, content creators. And I want to dig into both of these topics to give you a sense of what really changed, what we learned about change as we started to make this Lean UX process more concrete. On the design side, we recognized very quickly that deliverables are temporary, and that we had to change our focus from archives and deliverables to creating these transient artifacts, right? Focusing on creating just enough design to communicate what we're trying to get across. And working and using these transient artifacts, like sketches and lightweight wireframes, to work on creating a shared understanding for the entire team. And so, if I could use an index card, like the one you see on the screen, to communicate what I need from a developer, why would I go to the trouble of creating a wireframe deck and a perfect visual design if we can have a conversation about the idea at this level? And this realization came from the fact that all the specifications that we were creating, so if you think about the thick deliverables that we were creating, on a good day, in my experience, only about 50% of those deliverables were getting implemented. Half of the work that we were doing was getting thrown away. Total waste, right? And so the question then becomes, how do we communicate what's important faster? And how do we communicate it more effectively? And interestingly enough, with a lower fidelity artifact, you have to have more conversation. And that conversation yields a better shared understanding and a greater efficiency in getting features out the door. And what this did is it changed the way that we worked together, from documents as the core pieces of communication between the teams to conversations. And then instead of having these, and it really felt like interrogations, we'd work in these design phases and generate a design spec that was this thick. And then we'd hand it off to engineering or design approval from a business lead or a vice president. And it really felt like an interrogation. Why did you design it this way? Why do you want to work this way? Why should it be like this? I don't know if we can do this. And really change the nature of those conversations to being much less formal and much more realistic. Again, because if you think about it, if you spend 2 months creating a document this big, where every pixel is spec'd out, and someone tells you to change it, there's going to be a large amount of resistance to making those changes. But if you spend 5 minutes or a half hour sketching out an idea on a set of index cards or post-it notes, the conversation that you're having about that is far less formal. And the value that you get from that conversation is greater because you're willing to change direction more readily. And it starts to build comfort with the design team in showing work that felt unfinished. And it got the engineering folks and the product managers and the business folks engaged in the design work a lot sooner and a lot faster. And it fundamentally changed the way that we did design. All of a sudden, a lot more people were involved, and the level of fidelity of the work was a lot lower at first. But when we got to higher fidelity work, everybody was bought in. We didn't have to do any selling at that point, because everybody had been part of the iteration from index card to wireframe to visual design to prototype. And so that was fascinating on the design side. Now, on the product development side, we really had to start rethinking why we were doing certain bits of work, why we were doing certain work. The incentive structures that our teams and our leaders had put in place were focused on shipping features, period. Everybody was focused on getting features out the door. That's what Agile is all about, right? Efficiency, productivity, velocity. But guess what? No one was asking the question, so what? Right? So what? So we shipped it. Was it a good feature? How do we determine good? Did anybody use it? Did it change customer behavior in a positive way? Did it affect our business in any way? Right? And so all of a sudden, by involving not only the team but customers earlier in the process, we began to see that there was a level of value in the work that we were doing, or that there wasn't, much sooner. And that allowed us to start having a conversation with our product managers and ultimately our executives about why we're doing this work. We could say, hey, listen, we've been talking to customers and they don't see a value in this. Right? Maybe we should do work that people actually care about. And so then that changed the way that we started to incentivize the teams. Instead of saying, get features out the door, the conversation started to become, well, let's build something that actually changes customer behavior, something that somebody cares about, somebody doesn't have to say, so what? We have a clear sense of value to the customer, and it changes our definition of done. That's the key thing here, right? Done goes from shipping the feature to achieving an outcome, to changing customer behavior, and that was a really big corporate shift. And that really starts to get the conversation out of the deliverables business, right? Instead of, hey, did you finish the spec? Did you finish the wireframe? Did you ship the feature? The conversation starts to change towards, did you get customers to buy more stuff? Did you get customers to tell their friends about this feature? Did you get customers to sign up for this thing? And that was a fundamental change in thinking. Now here's the funny thing, or the interesting thing that's been happening. While we were building this way of working, while we were figuring out how to make this work, the realities of the market changed. Right? The capability to learn what was valuable, to understand whether or not somebody cares about the thing that we're building, increased dramatically and empowered us with this ability to learn continuously. Specifically, I'm talking about continuous integration and continuous deployment. The ability to get ideas out into market quickly, to sense very quickly whether or not those things are changing customer behavior in a positive way, and then to respond, either to optimize and scale those releases if they're doing well, or to roll them back and learn from those experiences. All those capabilities were becoming much more realistic and much more prevalent in software development, to the point where you could learn almost instantaneously, if you were big enough, whether or not this was a good idea or a bad idea. There was value in the idea. And to put a fine point on it, Amazon.com now pushes code to production every 11.6 seconds. 5 times a minute, Amazon pushes some kind of change to their code to production. Real people see real changes in code 5 times a minute. That provides them with an unbelievable amount of learning, continuous learning, about whether or not they're working on the right things. And they come back to their organization and say, we shouldn't be working on this. There is no value here. And we learn that quickly without spending too much time defining and designing something before learning that. Or there's a tremendous opportunity here. Let's optimize and let's push that forward. And that's really helped to shape the way that we're thinking about things. It provided us with new tools and, more importantly, new ways of thinking. And so, I don't know if you're noticing, but the beginning of this conversation started very tactically. How do we make design work better? And then I moved into how product development needs to change. And as you can see, this begins to scale up into an organizational state of mind, a set of concepts that affect process and that affect culture. And one of the key positions that an organization has to take if they're going to embrace this way of working is a position of humility. And a position of humility means that we don't know what the end state is going to be. We don't know what's going to work. We don't know what's going to solve customer problems. And so we're going to build collaborative teams that focus on understanding the customer, solving for real needs, and then shipping experiments, MVPs, to ensure that we're building the right things, right, to make sure. Right, let me give you an example from my world. This is going to be an interesting exercise because I can't see everybody in the room. But how many of you are runners in the room? If you're a runner, can I see a show of hands? Okay, good. I see a big chunk of folks back there. Let me ask the runners in the room a question. If I was to ask you, if at any time during your run you stop running, you pause your run, you take out your phone, you take a bunch of photos, you upload them to social media, and then you continue on with your run. How many of you do that? Yeah. Right. Nobody does that, right? And the reason you don't do that is because it's asinine, right? It seems stupid, right? I'm exercising, I'm not out on a nature walk. I'm out there running, right? But in organizations that are working to figure out what product you're working on, that is how decisions get made. Think about an idea, and you think, well, that's stupid, or that's a really good idea, and that's something we should work on. Well, it turns out that the future is unpredictable. If you take this position of humility, the future is unpredictable. And when you're out for a run, it turns out that you run past things. And you can run past scenery, sometimes very, very beautiful scenery, depending on where you are. And in my case, I was out running one day last summer in Los Angeles, and I was running on the pier at Venice Beach in Los Angeles in the morning, and it was beautiful, and the sun was shining, and it was rising, and the surfers were out, and the palm trees were swaying, and and I was using an app called Map My Run, and in using that app, I was measuring my run, and then at some point during the run, I saw that beautiful scene, and I paused for a second, and I paused my run, and I got this screen on there, and the screen said, hey, would you like to take a photo during your workout and upload them so others can see it? And this is the scene that I was running past. This is what I saw. And I said, you know what? Hell yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. And so at that particular moment, and so I pushed the button. I like the fact that it's the MVP as well, which is pretty cool. And I pushed the button, and they said, okay, terrific, give us $30, and you can upload the photo to social media. Right? Needless to say, I didn't pay $30 to upload the photos, but the point was that the opportunity for them to learn whether or not I wanted to do this was available to them, and they took advantage of it as part of the app workflow. They ran an experiment. They didn't simply make a decision in the boardroom that said, we want this feature or we don't want this feature. They took a position of humility that says, we don't know how the market will react to this idea, so we're going to run an experiment. It's a tremendous opportunity to use a continuous learning model and a natural curiosity and humility to learn customer intent and the perceived value of a feature for nothing more than a couple of photo overlays in an app upload. And what's frustrating, or what's to me, is that companies continue to make product decisions this way. I saw that this was a conversation that happened on one of our Slack channels at work a couple of weeks ago, right? And essentially it says, hey, I'm trying to get this article in the Wall Street Journal, and they have a paywall. Well, it turns out that you can just search for the article title in Google and then view the whole article without paying any money to the Wall Street Journal. Right? Somebody inside the Wall Street Journal decided they were going to have a feature, a deliverable, not a customer experience, and certainly not a desirable one. And they didn't bother to check and test whether or not that was a good model and how that was going to work. Right? We simply can't make product decisions this way anymore. Right? features emerge from customers using our products and our systems, right? This is the first Twitter homepage. You'll notice there's not a mention or a discussion of the hashtag feature. And yet, hashtags emerged from use, and the system embraced it. And now, it's one of the most powerful components of the platform, and it's monetized. They sell advertising against hashtags. Again, the organization is to really take this point of view that we can't predict the future. And we have to learn from the system, and we have to let these ideas emerge and not determine them well in advance. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't matter how many times you've been right about your assumptions in the past before. One of my favorite stories is about the Amazon Fire Phone. Jeff Bezos and Amazon $170 million in the Amazon Fire Phone because they built it for Jeff Bezos. They didn't build it for the customers. They built it for Jeff. That's what he wanted. He designed it. He decided what was good. And he drove the product all the way to the point where it was only good for him. And nobody bought this phone. It was a $199 phone. Today, it's available for 99 cents. And he's been right a lot in the past. And so excuse his teams for saying, well, if Jeff wants it, we'll build it. And not questioning it because he's done so well in the past. But the reality is, you always have to have a position of humility to understand where you're headed, right? The idea is to build experimentation into your process and drive that continuous learning. And these are components of lean UX, right? I use the term MVP to mean the same thing as experiment. It's the smallest thing that we can make or do to test our assumptions, right? If we can go and talk to customers and learn if our assumptions are right, terrific, let's do that. If we have to build a prototype, terrific, but let's not do anything more than that. And then once we build experimentation and learning into our process, we have to iterate, right? If you don't get it right the first time, you try again. Experimentations lead to learnings. And as you build an iterative mentality in your organization, it allows you to get to that next experiment quickly. And every time you learn, every time you experiment, you're nudging the product in a more accurate direction. You're designing a better product. And you're getting qualitative learning. Now, along the same lines, you're collecting data, right? You're making sure that you're collecting the quantitative side and the qualitative side. You want to understand what people are doing and why they're doing it. They're equally as important. Many people don't do either of these. Some people don't want to talk to customers because they're scared to tell them things they don't want to hear. And some people don't measure because they think it's difficult or it's expensive. But when you've got a sense of what people are doing and why they're doing it, that gives you a 360-degree view where you can then take the next experiment in a much more tactical direction. Now, the interesting thing, as you build this mentality of experimentation, of learning, it changes the nature of your organization, right? Well, another component of the UX that I've learned is responsiveness. It's the ability for an organization to react quickly to newly learned information. It's not enough simply to say, hey, this doesn't meet our customers' needs. We have to actually give our teams the ability to act quickly, to improve and to optimize the components of the relationship. And because when you build that responsiveness into the culture of your organization, there's a much more relaxed aspect to the way that you're working. You end up, if you're more responsive, you're more agile, you can take things as they come to you. If that guy with the arrow pointing to, you can be that guy. No matter what's happening around you, you can kind of relax and say, I got this. Right? No worries about that. That's what responsiveness gives you. To be like that guy hanging out here, drinking his beer. And again, as you're thinking about this, you want to remember that our definition of done, our definition of success is changing customer behavior. Can we get people to do things differently that benefit them and benefit us? That's the definition of done. That's the definition of success, not shipping the feature. Shipping the feature is the first step in the process. And if you buy into that, you can then start to decide how to fund your efforts, how you measure progress, right? Instead of measuring progress in being, hey, did you change a feature? Hey, we're making progress towards our measure of customer behavior, and we should fund this further. That you can use objective evidence to decide whether or not initiatives are funding continuously. Now, a couple of quick points, and then I'll wrap up and take some questions. This changes everything, regardless of what situation you work in. It changes everything. If you work in an agency, for example, this redefines your business model. You're no longer selling features, no longer selling specs, you're no longer selling prototypes. You're no longer fixing deadlines and scope. Right? Essentially, you're going to start selling time, you're going to start selling outcomes. And you need to start selling holistic teams, product design and engineering, and selling time for those teams. Right? You want to sell successful products ultimately. That redefines the way that you shape your services company. I work in a services company. We've been lucky enough to shape it from the beginning. We launched it, it's our company. But if you're already working in one, this means kind of changing your business model a bit, and that can be very scary as well. If you work in-house, what this means, all of the lean approach to design and collaboration, is that you no longer have an internal agency. Designers are on all the teams, product managers are on all the teams are cross-functionals. If you're familiar with the Spotify model, right, that squad model, product design and engineering, no more silos. Transparency is key. Everybody's aware of what everybody's doing. You're making decisions based on evidence, based on learning. And that there's a safe environment for learning, for experimentation. People are allowed to fail, essentially. That's really the key. And the success, again, becomes positively impacting customer behavior. Now, all of this, you can build these elements into your culture. And listen, that's a lot of stuff. That gets you out of the deliverables business. It gets you into conversations, and it gets product idea to market faster, and ultimately getting the best products, the best designed products out to market faster. And that's really what I've learned about UX the last 5 years. It really is getting out of the deliverables business, focusing more on building great products and building great teams. So thanks a lot for listening tonight, and I'd love to take your questions. And, is that better? Hi, Sylvia.
You mentioned you work in a service company, so you want to so when I would like to, and one of the challenges you have that you use your market so when you customers always want something very
Next.
Yep. So I'll tell you how we do it. It's not necessarily the right way. We're always evolving, but currently that's how we do it. So we price a team, and we price that team by the week. So we have we're a small agency, and our teams are small. Typically they're 4 people, sometimes they're 5 people at most. They're a cross-functional team, and we sell that team at a weekly rate. We don't break down the weekly rate by skill set or by seniority level of the people on the team. And so essentially, the client says, we'd like you to solve this business problem. And we say, okay, we think this team of 4 people will solve that business problem for you. This team costs $100 a week. And we think that we'll need at least 12 weeks to get to a reasonable first solution on this. And so the client then has the ability to say, okay, I want 8 weeks, I want 16 weeks, but we don't want them messing with the balance of the people that we have on the team. And we don't tell them, a senior person costs this much an hour, and a mid-level person costs this much an hour, because then they come in and say, okay, well, we'll take 2 more hours of mid-level and 1 less hour of senior and all of those things, right? So we just give them a team, And we adjust the mix of that team throughout the project. You know, for example, if we need more content strategy and visual design and less engineering, we can adjust it that way. Or more engineering and less product management, we can adjust it. But as long as the number of people stays the same, the weekly rate stays the same. But it's, you know, I wish it was retainer, but typically it's a fixed time initially, right? And we do our best not to commit to fixed scope, because that's a recipe for failure.
Jeff, you started your talk by saying, telling the story about heartbreaks between the UX, the traditional UX and the agile world. And I've made this experience very often. What would be your strategy in communicating with the UX guys when you see that they are when they are basically afraid of not getting something beautiful out there, not getting something that they can be proud of out there because it is incremental, because it is in small pieces. Because what they're used to is making things, you know, beautiful and having time to think about them. All of those benefits of the old waterfall world.
That's a great question. You know, it's interesting. It's been a while since I've met a highly resistant UX person, but you know, I would ask them to take their lightweight ideas and start talking to customers early. Or, you know, it's again, most UX people that I've met, I'm curious who this UX person is that you're talking about, because most of the UX people that I meet these days are very, very happy to talk to customers and are very willing to change their work. I think where there's concern, perhaps, is in shipping what feel like unfinished experiences. And I think the conversation to have there is, you know, can we get somebody through enough of the experience so that we can learn something meaningful from it? That's the key, is to get them into a learning situation. And I think that if we can, like in all of these cases where you find a resistant, whether it's a designer or an engineer, is to say, look, let's take something small and low risk, and let's launch a lightweight version of it. And hopefully they can see the benefits of the learnings that come from that. Now look, I want to be clear, there are situations where more design is necessary for the learning that you need to get. For example, if you work in the fashion space, right? Any kind of fashion startup or feature or workflow requires some level of branding, right? Fashion has a strong branding component to it. In those situations, you want to get a level of design on something so that it gives the impression of a holistic brand, right? But that's not necessarily relevant in an insurance company, for example. So those are all ways those are some ways to have those conversations. But if you can take something small and expose people to that learning, typically there's an efficacy that gets people bought in.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
More questions? Yeah, you have to move.
Me?
No. And you can try it.
You guys like my shirt?
So, I do have a question if you don't mind working in corporations. What would you say is the better way of transforming or trying to get the process done of rethinking your way of doing? Is it a step-by-step approach, or is it more or less a declaration at point X to say, okay, now time has changed and things have to work now in a completely different way? So is it step by step, or is it one time and shift things?
Got it. Good question. Step one, hire me. I'm kidding. No, I'm not kidding, actually. No, the way, look, I'll tell you my experience. My experience is this. Every company that I've seen in the last 10 years that has tried to take a top-down pronouncement approach, we are now agile. We are now lean. It's been a colossal failure. And it's been a colossal failure because nobody understands why they're doing it, and nobody really sees the value. They just see it as kind of being pushed onto them, and they don't get it. In most situations where I've seen it done well, it starts bottom up, or at the very least it starts small. An organization makes the decision that they'd like to work this way, and they identify a pilot team and a pilot project. And what they do is they carve out a space for that team to figure out how to work like this. And they learn two things, first of all. The first thing that they learn is how to do this. Just in general, when you're sitting side by side, product design, engineering, and marketing, how do we all work together? And the second thing, which is really important, is how do you do this inside this company, right? Without politics, with our customers, within our domain constraints. And that goes a long way. Now, it's the leadership's job to protect that team for a period of time, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, half a year, to give them room to try, to learn, and to experiment with process until they get it right. Now, the responsibility of the team is to be as transparent as possible. So, because people fear change, right? And so if you took a team like that, a pilot team, and you stuck them in the corner or in a conference room somewhere and closed the door, and they emerge 6 months later to say, okay, we got the process, everybody now do this, no one's buying into it. It's going to be a really difficult sell. Instead, put them in the center of the floor where everybody is, and make sure everything they do is transparent. It's out in the open. They make sure that they have a demo day every week, that their Scrum board is visible, that their metrics are up on screens, that their failures are publicized, so the company sees that it's okay to try something and do wrong, and that their successes are celebrated. And so I've seen this happen firsthand, as that team begins to find its groove and to start to do a good job, what it ends up doing is it becomes a very viral thing. People will come to work and they look over and they're like, these guys are doing some interesting things, or they seem like they're really making progress on that thing. People start to pay attention, they get curious, and attendance goes up at the demo days, and people start to ask, well, how come I don't work this way? And that's when you build a second team, and a third team, and a fourth team. That's been the most effective way that I've seen to really scale this process in a big company that doesn't currently work this way. It also starts to acclimate the management layer to the changes in what they should expect from these teams. And so slowly you kind of build the momentum behind this way of working. That's what I've seen work well.
Thank you.
Okay, seems like we're done. Thank you very much for joining again.
My pleasure. Thank you guys very much. If you do want to follow up with me, if you have any questions that we didn't ask or that you think about later, please email me. My email is jeff@neo.com, neo.com. It's a really good email address. So don't hesitate to email me with any questions. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm really glad I got a chance to hang out tonight. And I hope to be back in Berlin soon. Like I said, I've only been there once, and I look forward to coming back.
Awesome. Okay, see you soon.
All right. Thank you guys very much. Bye-bye.